The church bells in Chicago rang hollow that morning, echoing through the crisp autumn air. The pews inside St. Gabriel's were filled with neighbors, old friends, and distant relatives, all dressed in somber black. My wife of 32 years, Margaret, had passed away after a long battle with illness. I should have been grieving in silence, but instead, I stood at the center of a storm I hadn't seen coming. It happened right after the service, when everyone moved to the parish hall for coffee and sandwiches. My daughter-in-law, Vanessa, who had never hidden her dislike for me, leaned in close. Her perfume was sharp, almost suffocating. With a smirk curling her lips, she whispered so only I could hear. "Now that Margaret's gone, you're all alone. Don't expect us to pick up the slack. We're not your babysitters." Her words cut deeper than the burial itself. People around us were still offering condolences, but all I could hear was her venom. I glanced at my son, Daniel, her husband, my only child. He stood nearby, staring at his phone, completely detached. Not once did he look up, not once did he notice his wife tearing me apart at my wife's funeral. I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I simply folded my hands, nodded politely, and walked away. Because in that moment, I realized something: this family I had sacrificed everything for, wasn't my family anymore. That night, back in my empty home overlooking Lake Michigan, I sat by the window with a glass of scotch. Chicago's skyline glittered in the distance, the Willis Tower piercing the clouds. But inside, it was quiet. Too quiet. I thought of Margaret. How she'd always been the glue, the peacekeeper. Without her, the cracks were showing, and Daniel was letting Vanessa steer his life. My phone buzzed. 20 missed calls from Daniel. A few from Vanessa. I didn't answer. I wasn't ready to hear excuses. Not yet. The following week, Daniel finally showed up at my doorstep. He didn't come with flowers or an apology. He came with Vanessa at his side and a folder tucked under his arm. "Dad," he said, his tone clipped. "We need to talk about the will." My chest tightened. Margaret and I had worked our whole lives to build something stable. A house, investments, a small business we'd sold for a good sum. That money was supposed to carry me through retirement. "Your mom wanted us to look after you," Daniel continued, "but it makes more sense if the assets are transferred now. We could invest them better than you can." I stared at him. At my own son. The nerve. "Daniel," I said slowly, "your mother's wishes are clear. I'll be fine on my own. The will is already written." Vanessa rolled her eyes. "Oh please. You're pushing 60, living in this big house alone. Do you even know what you're doing with those accounts? Daniel's trying to help you. Don't be selfish." Selfish. That word stung. After decades of 12-hour workdays, of missed holidays, of pouring everything into giving Daniel the best life possible, now I was selfish. I didn't argue. Instead, I smiled faintly. "Not today," I said, closing the door on them both. But the harassment didn't stop. Over the next month, Daniel and Vanessa kept showing up. First, they asked politely. Then they demanded. Then they brought lawyers, thick stacks of papers, urging me to sign over control. One evening, Vanessa slammed her hand on my dining table. "Do you want to die alone, Harold? Is that what you want? Because at this rate, you're pushing us away for good." I leaned back in my chair, the wood creaking under my weight. I didn't flinch. "If that's what it takes," I said, "then so be it." She gasped, but I stayed calm. Because what she didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that I was already rewriting everything. See, Margaret and I had prepared carefully. Years ago, we'd met with a trusted attorney, a friend of hers from college. The will was airtight. And after her passing, I added a few adjustments. If Daniel and Vanessa thought they could bully me into signing, they were in for a shock. Still, part of me hoped Daniel would wake up. That he'd see through Vanessa's greed before it was too late. But that hope withered the night I overheard them. It was at Thanksgiving. They insisted I come to their condo in Lincoln Park. I went, mostly out of habit. Margaret would have wanted me there. The dinner table was crowded with Vanessa's family, all of them loud and polished, sipping wine like royalty. Daniel sat at the head, not me, not the elder. That was fine, I didn't care about appearances. But after dessert, when I slipped to the balcony for some fresh air, I heard them talking inside. Vanessa's voice was sharp as ever. "He's stubborn, Daniel. If he won't hand it over, we'll just wait him out. He can't last forever. The minute he's gone, everything's ours." Daniel's reply was muffled, almost uncertain. But then I heard it. "You're right. Dad's too old-fashioned. We'll get it one way or another." My heart sank. That was it. The last thread of hope snapped. When I left that night, I knew what I had to do. I drove through downtown Chicago, past the shining lights and bustling streets, and stopped at my lawyer's office. Even though it was nearly midnight, I emailed him everything I wanted. Changes to the will. Instructions for my estate. And a final letter, sealed and ready. If my son and his wife wanted to play games, I'd play too. But on my terms. The months that followed grew colder, both outside and within my family. Daniel barely called. Vanessa sent short, clipped texts about updates and timelines. I ignored them all. Instead, I spent my time quietly. Walks along Navy Pier. Visits to Margaret's grave. Dinners with old friends I hadn't seen in years. Because I knew the storm was coming. And when it did, I would be ready. One Sunday, Daniel called me out of the blue. His voice was unusually cheerful. "Dad, we're having a family meeting next week. Vanessa's parents will be there too. We'd love for you to come. It's time we settled everything." Settled everything. I almost laughed. But instead, I said, "Of course. I'll be there." Because little did they know, I had plans of my own. The day of the so-called family meeting arrived with a sky as gray as wet concrete. Chicago was buzzing outside, horns blaring on Michigan Avenue, trains rattling overhead, but in my chest, there was only stillness. I slipped into my best suit, a dark navy one Margaret always said made me look distinguished. Before leaving, I paused at the mantel. Her photo was there, smiling, warm, forever the woman who kept me grounded. "I'll handle this, Maggie," I whispered. "One last time." Then I tucked the sealed envelope into my jacket pocket and left. The meeting was held in a sleek high-rise office downtown, one of those glass towers that seems to scrape the clouds. When I walked into the conference room, my heart didn't skip a beat. Because I had expected it all. Daniel was already there, pacing. Vanessa sat beside him, perfectly composed, her crimson nails tapping the table. Across from them, two lawyers waited with stacks of documents, their pens neatly lined like weapons. "Dad," Daniel said with forced cheer, "glad you made it." I nodded, taking my seat at the far end of the table. Vanessa wasted no time. "We've prepared everything for you to sign today. This way, you won't have to stress about finances anymore. Daniel and I will handle the investments, the property, everything." She pushed the papers toward me. The lawyers slid pens across the table. For a moment, silence reigned. Then, I smiled. Slowly. Calmly. almost amused. Funny, I said, resting my hand on the envelope in my pocket. Because I brought some papers too. The room shifted. Vanessa frowned. Daniel blinked. One of the lawyers leaned forward, clearly irritated by the disruption. I placed the envelope on the table, sliding it across with deliberate care. "What's this?" Daniel asked, his voice wavering. "My will," I said simply. Vanessa scoffed. "You can't just." "Yes, I can," I interrupted. My voice didn't rise, but it carried the weight of a lifetime. "And before you get too excited, you should probably hear what it says." I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands. "You see, Margaret and I prepared for this. Years ago, long before either of you thought about dollar signs. And after she passed, I made sure the will reflected the truth." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. Vanessa's smirk faltered. "The house? The accounts? The investments?" I paused, letting the tension stretch. "None of it goes to you." The words landed like a thunderclap. Vanessa shot up from her chair. "What? That's ridiculous. You can't just." "I can," I said firmly. And I did. Daniel's face turned red. "Dad, this isn't fair. I'm your son." "Exactly," I replied. "You're my son. Which is why I hoped, prayed, you would stand by me after your mother died. But instead, you let her," I glanced at Vanessa, "turn you against me. You treated me like a burden. A bank account to be emptied." Vanessa sputtered, her voice sharp. "We were trying to help you." "Help me?" I chuckled, shaking my head. "By cornering me with lawyers? By calling me selfish in my own home? By waiting for me to die so you could feast on what's left? No. That's not help. That's greed." One of the lawyers finally cleared his throat. "Mr. Collins, perhaps we should." "No," I said, cutting him off. "You'll want to hear the rest. Because I didn't leave everything to charity, as you're probably imagining." I reached into the envelope again and pulled out a second sheet. "I left it to someone else. Someone who's been there for me when my own family wasn't." Daniel's voice cracked. "Who?" I smiled. "You'll find out soon enough. But I'll tell you this, when I was preparing all this, I realized something. Family isn't about blood. It's about loyalty. Respect. And those who stood by me when I was at my lowest, they're the ones who deserve it." The silence that followed was almost sweet. Vanessa's face drained of color. Daniel stared at the table, unable to meet my eyes. Finally, Vanessa snapped. "This is insane. You can't just throw away your legacy to strangers. You'll regret this." I rose from my chair, smoothing my jacket. "The only regret I have," I said evenly, "is raising a son who let greed blind him." Then I turned toward the door. But before leaving, I paused, looking back just once. "Oh, and Vanessa," I said, letting the words drip with quiet satisfaction. "It's funny, you thought you were clever bringing your lawyers. But I bought someone too." I gestured toward the hallway, where my own attorney stepped in. A calm, composed man with decades of experience, and a file thicker than theirs combined. "Everything's already filed with the court," I continued. "This meeting? It's nothing but theater." I left them there, in that glass tower, drowning in silence and disbelief. The weeks that followed were oddly peaceful. Daniel tried calling, leaving desperate voicemails. Vanessa sent furious emails, some threatening, some pleading. I ignored them all. Because I was done. I spent my days walking along the lakefront, visiting old jazz clubs Margaret and I once loved, even volunteering at a community center on the south side. And in those moments, surrounded by people who didn't care about my money but about my presence, I felt lighter than I had in years. The final blow came 6 months later, at the official will reading. Daniel and Vanessa sat stiffly in the lawyer's office, their faces pale, eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights. I didn't attend, I didn't need to. My lawyer handled everything. When the truth was read aloud, the air must have cracked like glass. Every dollar, every property, every investment, went to a foundation Margaret and I had created in secret. A scholarship fund for underprivileged students in Chicago. Daniel got nothing. Vanessa got nothing. And just like that, their empire of expectation crumbled. People sometimes ask me if I regret it. If I regret cutting off my only son. The truth? I regret that it had to come to this. That he let greed poison his heart. That he chose someone who saw me as a wallet instead of a father. But as I sit here tonight, looking out at the city lights flickering against Lake Michigan, I know Margaret would be proud. Proud that her legacy is helping children chase their dreams instead of funding someone else's selfishness. And as for me, I may be alone in this house. But I'm not lonely. Because peace, real peace, is worth more than any inheritance.